the start of heaven is I'm coming out of this clearing in the woods, and I see Mary across the clearing, and I run towards her and embrace her. That's kind of my image of like the start of heaven, at least, that I use for meditation. So.
Thank you, Father Matthew. We're here in the Rosary Hour Podcast Digital Cafe, and I'm Tina, and I'm hosting our digital cafe talks. And my co-host today is Sherry Marcotte, who is a Catholic mother of 7, a wife of 25 years, who converted to Catholicism 23 years ago. She has been working professionally in the field of special needs for nearly 30 years, and she enjoys discovering ways that assist with communication for children and adults that struggle with augmentative challenges to have their needs met. So welcome, Sherry. And joining us today, thank you so much for coming, Father Matthew. We are so pleased to welcome you to our digital cafe. Father Matthew is a priest with the Legionaries of Christ, who in their work as missionaries in today's world invite others to live for Christ and to transform the culture around them. And he is known as the Autistic priest and has done amazing work in bringing understanding to the needs of individuals who are living with the effects of the spectrum and advocating for awareness and support in the context of their Catholic faith. He has written a book that's out now, God Loves the Autistic Mind, Prayer Guide for Those on the Spectrum and Those Who Love Us. Father Matthew is also just completing his doctoral thesis on moral theology. There's the book, yes, the Prayer Guide. And there's so much that we'd like to discuss with you. Sherry will take us through a number of topics that we are eager to discuss with you. But I just wanted to first talk about your book. God Loves the Autistic Mind. And it's all about how those who are living with the effects of the spectrum can respond to God's love with them in the fullness of who they are, and suggests an approach to prayer or approaches to prayer that are perhaps less dependent on language. And can you just tell us more about your prayer journey and the book?
So yeah, the book is really kind of the subtitle kind of explains it. Prayer guide for those on the spectrum and those who love us, really is kind of the synthesis of what the book is. And it really came to me from when I was first diagnosed. I was diagnosed with autism as an adult. I was actually already a priest, and I was assigned to be a chaplain. Didn't super work out, and then I sought out a diagnosis. And after I was diagnosed, started reading a lot, like a ton. I have a whole bookshelf of autism books, and I started thinking, oh, there's got to be like ones. There's autism in relationships, autism in this, autism in that. But where's like autism in prayer or autism in religion? There were a few kind of guides for teachers in special ed or catechesis or things like that, but there wasn't really anything for the individual autistic person to pray. And I felt kind of a nudge of the Holy Spirit kind of say, you know what? You've studied spiritual theology. You're a Catholic priest. Maybe this is the call. And I didn't start writing the book right then, but I definitely started thinking about it. And then a few years later, I end up, I wrote the book a little bit later on when I felt that that inspiration we kept getting stronger, the inspiration from the Holy Spirit to write that. And so that's kind of the journey that brought about the book. The book kind of has two parts. Originally, I proposed it as a very brief introduction and 30 daily devotions, but work with Pauline Press and things. We end up doing a kind of longer introduction that actually is separated into 3 chapters that makes up about a third of the book, and then 52 daily devotions instead of just 30. And that's the basic structure of the book. Gives you kind of a sense. The first, three not paragraphs. The first 3 chapters are kind of a systematic overview of autistic prayer, and then the 52 daily devotions go through a number of different prayer things, whether it's something specific to autism, like you mentioned in the intro, prayer without words and things like that, or whether it's something more general but taken from an autistic perspective, like there's meditations on the Eucharist or on the resurrection, which I would assume most Catholic books on prayer might have a meditation on each of those themes. So I think that that's how the book came about, and that's the basic outline of the book.
Father,
Yes.
I'm very excited about this book. I know so many people and families that would really benefit from the 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 clues you could give them in using their God-given traits and talents used towards a firmer and closer relationship with Christ through prayer. Um, with regards to our local parishes, how would you think is a good place to start?
Well, I think that there's kind of two aspects to go with. And I think that they're kind of related, but kind of different. And one is just the acceptance, so that if there's an autistic kid there who has issues, and maybe he's running around, or maybe he is struggling with catechesis or something, you don't ostracize him. You accept him and look at the beauty that God has in every person like that. And the second thing is making things specifically for autistic people, whether it's how we structure our catechesis, or one of the things I focused on a lot recently on my website and things is trying to make it so that there's a sensory friendly mass, because a lot of autistic, well, everyone who's autistic has some kind of irregularity in sensory issues, and it just varies how it is. But for a lot of autistic people, it's that what is considered normal for most people is too much for them. I have this to a minor degree. Like, I'm the first one to put on sunglasses if we step outside, and I never leave the house without sunglasses. But a lot of others have the same kind of idea, but much more seriously, where the normal mass with its with the lights and the sound and stuff is too much, and they need that toned down. And so a lot of dioceses throughout North America have started a sensory friendly mass where they have all that turned down. And some do it the whole mass, and some do it what I would call a reverse cry room, where basically you use the cry room at the back of the church, and then you say at like the 10 o'clock mass on Sunday morning, we're going to turn down the lights in there, turn down the volume on the sound system, and let autistic people or others who have sensory issues in there, so they can come to mass and not be overwhelmed. That may still be too much for some because they look out from the choir room into the main church and all the lights in there. But a lot of different things like that can be a big help to allow autistic people to come to church. So I think that those are kind of the two aspects. I think there's a lot of kind of sub aspects in those as well, in being accepting and also making specific accommodations. But I think those are the main two aspects.
For families who are living with children or even adults like yourself who just found out later on in life that they are, you know, struggling with this, how would someone go to the priest or the parish and ask what would be the first step for them? Would they go to the diocese, find out where there already is masses, or would they go to the parish priest that they're attending?
Well, what I would recommend is to see if there's something in the diocese or in the deanery that is like that, because just with the numbers who might attend, I'm not thinking every single parish is going to have it. Maybe every diocese or every deanery, at least for now, is a reasonable hope we can have. A deanery, for those who aren't aware, is kind of a collection of a number of parishes and dioceses. Like in my hometown of Calgary, there's like the South Calgary Deanery, and then there's the Northeast and Northwest Calgary Deanery, and then there's like 2 or 3 rural deaneries, which are the parishes in a certain area. And they're not the same level as the diocese, but they're kind of an intermediate between the diocese and the parish. Just because a lot of Catholics don't know what deaneries are, but the
Thank you.
it's they're not essential. They're kind of like a general practice that almost every diocese I've ever been in North America has. But so the idea is that, we as autistic people are about 2% of the population. Probably, I would say maybe half of us really need something like a sensory friendly mass, something like that. So you're looking at 1% of the population, and to add an extra Sunday mass for 1% of the population in the church gets kind of tough as far as what priests can do and everything. But if it's add one mass somewhere in the city where you already have 50 masses, 60 masses on Sunday morning, okay, all of a sudden it's that 1%, and it's also their family, so it's actually proportionate to the need. I think that's what we can look for right now. And I think that that's probably the best to look for right now. Now, if it doesn't exist in your diocese or your deanery, then I would see, maybe working out with the pastor there to maybe do something locally in your parish. And I think a lot of times the reverse choir room type idea can work a little easier, at least especially to start off, because then it doesn't require the priest to say another mass, the choir to set up again, uh, all the kind of logistics for that. It just requires that one of the choir rooms, if you have multiple, a lot of parishes have like 2 or 3, is turned down, is adjusted during that mass, and it might be very easy to do that, or might at most it's installing basically dimmer switches on the lights and on the audio in the room, which are not that expensive to install if you know what you're doing. So hopefully that's helpful.
You can subscribe to our newsletter at rosaryhourpodcast.substack.com. That's rosaryhourpodcast.substack.com.
I was thinking in response, shamefully, I don't know in our diocese if we have a sensory mass. So I'll definitely be checking into that with VanSpec. I don't know if VanSpec is in every other diocese in North America, but certainly it is in Vancouver. One thing I was thinking of that would be helpful is maybe even having a pamphlet put together by the parish saying if you or your child struggles with the disorder or the challenges afflicted by the sensory disorder, we have a pamphlet there to talk about, to invite them to have some ideas, such as headphones or going into the reverse crying room, or maybe bringing stim toys, or storyboard. What are your thoughts of that? Do you think that would be helpful?
Oh, definitely. I think that those type of things are immensely helpful. I think you have to find out, because each autistic person is a little different in that regard. And sometimes if it's something as simple as, okay, I put on my noise canceling headphones, then you're dealing with the acceptance aspect where people aren't worried that this kid is coming into mass with headphones on, or even just like what I don't use headphones, but I use sometimes little earphones when I go to, like, these ones are they're like they're what's called forget the name, high fidelity
Earbuds?
earplugs. Well, they're earplugs, but they're what's called high fidelity. They cost quite a bit more than just the foam ones that you squish in. But what
Okay.
it is they just reduce the volume, but you can still hear clearly. Like, for example, if I go to a big mass at the cathedral with all the priests and everything, I'll often put these in, because the normal mass, the volume is fine and all the sound, but then if it can get too much, if it's at, like, like a 4-hour mass for the installation of a new bishop or something, with all the priests and the choir going all out and everything else. So, or if I'm going like down through downtown for some reason for a bit, that can help. And these are pretty invisible because they're clear they're white on the inside, but that really goes inside your ear. The part that comes outside your ear is like a clear plastic, so it it's not really obvious unless you're paying a lot of attention, and or things like that. So, but then it's like, if an autistic child needs, oh, I need headphones. Okay, well, then it's an acceptance issue in the parish more than anything else, if that's all they need to attend mass. So I think those type of things. And you also have to look, because for us, a lot of times it's not so much the volume of the sound, especially, but kind of the filtering of it. For example, uh, you know, to me, it doesn't matter. Like, you can turn up the volume way up; it doesn't bother me. But if I'm trying to carry on a conversation with somebody, and somebody's talking right behind me, that starts to wear down on me very quickly, because like, filtering out in my brain, okay, what's this person in front of me that I'm talking to saying versus all these other people talking around me, can get difficult. I found that for myself, if I'm in a big room like at a social event, I'll always try and stay around the edge with my back to the wall. And I find it much easier, because then, at least for myself, I can filter out the people talking behind them better than I can filter out the people talking behind me. And that's something that I can do where I know how to deal with it myself, but other people might not see it. So
It's so valuable to have these ideas discussed. It seems to me that as soon as the parish begins the conversation, whether it's, a notice in the bulletin, whether it's, advertising that there is, as sensory sensitive mass, or that there is going to be, a calm room in the cry room for certain times, or pamphlets inviting people to, come and discuss their needs. I think as soon as you begin that conversation, it seems as though we are building awareness across the whole parish. We're starting to. Do you feel that people are just going to become more aware, more sensitive to individual needs?
Yeah, and I think there's kind of an awareness and an acceptance, and I think a lot of times it's more on the acceptance level. Like people, like today, I don't think there's too many people in North America who don't know that autism exists, for example. I think that's a rare minority. But I do think that a lot of times there's people who don't who struggle with accepting the difficulties autism brings. I've had numerous parents of autistic kids, come to me about things that they struggle with at their parish, whether it's my kid runs around and people just give me these like glaring looks like I'm a bad parent, or other issues of the parish where the people know autism exists, may or may not know that this kid is autistic, but don't really accept how he behaves differently based on that, and kind of judge this mother's parenting that her kid sprints for the door in the middle of mass randomly or something like that. So
Um, your book talks about the traits of people with autism and how that can actually be used to benefit a stronger relationship with prayer. What traits would you like to highlight?
well, I think that a lot of times autistic people have a very strong long-term memory. um, I know myself I do, and that seems to be a very common thing, especially if it's like a special interest. Like autism will get like very focused on one thing, and we're like an encyclopedia for it at times. Uh, Many of you who have had encounters with autistic people would probably be like, yeah, they talked like they were an encyclopedia on trains or on like this or that. And if part of that is the Bible or the catechism and things like that, all of a sudden you can take that to prayer, and all these extra things about prayer that are not so much in the external in most people, but you have like most people have that. They'll have memory of, oh, I remember this is in the catechism, but maybe the autistic person remembers the exact words of the catechism, which can help for prayer or things like that. So I think that that's one aspect. Another thing is just to realize uh, how one of the things with a lot of the sensory issues and a lot of the issues that we talk about with social interaction is that between 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 our immediate sense experience and our conscious knowledge of that sense experience, there are certain things that happen, right? That there's filters. For example, if I grab this is my green spearmint gum. Oh, there we go. Got to show it on screen. Green spearmint gum. This is container of spearmint gum from the grocery store. Now, there's something that happens between when this like the light reflects off this green thing here, and I have that specific wavelength of light at the back of my eye, and my conscious thought, this is my spearmint gum from the grocery store. I have a vow of poverty. This is grocery store brand. It's a U.S. grocery store. So, but the idea is that that those filters are not as present in autistic people, and those filters also with social interactions. And that can be a challenge at the beginning of prayer, but once you get deeper in prayer, those kind of filters between you and God and your conversation could actually be obstacles that most people have that we don't, where we can really communicate more directly with God in our prayer in that regard. So I think that there are a few aspects where autistic people can really have a certain degree of profundity in prayer that might not be so present elsewhere.
With my experience of working with children and adults on the spectrum, I found that the structure of the mass is very beneficial to children. They can rely on it, they can trust it. The transitional time is not so much needed. Can you speak about that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. Autistic people, we tend to struggle with what's called executive functioning, which a number of other disabilities do too, like ADHD and things like that. And the idea of executive functioning is, how you schedule, how you organize things. And for us, one of the things is if it's regular, it helps us overcome that, because we're not that great with changes. Like like if you want to, like even people I work with, I'm like, if you want to make a meeting with me, if you call me up in the morning, I'm just going to say no unless it's like an absolute emergency that happened this morning. Because if you tell me, 48 hours beforehand, I can plan better mentally and be mentally prepared for it. But if you tell me 5 hours beforehand, I'm going to be, you might have a 20-minute meeting, but I might be drained for another 2 hours because I didn't have that meeting planned for. And so in the same way, with the mass, that it's regular, that it's the consistency. And in the same, and likewise with that, for example, we have with the sensory friendly masses, I know a few of them have done things where they have the same songs every Sunday, which is kind of unusual. Most parishes rotate between 20 different songs or so for the opening hymn, closing hymn on Sundays. But to keep that regularity, they would keep the same songs every time there, and that helps with that kind of regularity. In the same way that the mass helps with regularity. Like even I gave a talk to a Protestant group or an interview, and I said, you know what, like even if you want to maintain a Protestant theology, going to a what they would call liturgical church, which is much more like us, as opposed to one of those ones where it's evangelical, where you don't know what the schedule is going to be each Sunday to Sunday, might be beneficial for autistic people just because they can follow the kind of consistency there better. So
Yeah, the earlier mass.
well, also like I wrote a thing on my website, basically how to deal with sensory issues at mass, and basically if you didn't have a sensory friendly mass nearby that would work for you. And a few of the things are like often the Latin mass can be a little more sensory friendly, and especially if it's a low mass, and often like the 7:30 a.m. mass can be the sensory friendly one at the parish. uh, so those type of things can be a help. So.
You can subscribe to our newsletter at rosaryhourpodcast.substack.com. That's rosaryhourpodcast.substack.com.
Just a little bit related to the Mass and the Gospel. You've suggested that there's a need with Catholics living with the effects of the spectrum sometimes to understand the Gospel and other aspects of our faith a little bit more logically than just emotionally. I feel as though this could be useful for a lot of us who don't understand deeply enough the faith. But if you could just say a little bit more about different ways of understanding.
Well, I mean, there's a different sense of like, different people are more logical or more emotional in their decision making. I think we can all notice that across for autistics and non-autistics. Different people plan more or less. Like I have two sisters, and like one of them, it's like, you know, she has everything planned out. The other one, it's like, oh, school's out. What's my plan for the summer? Like she's posting on Facebook. She hasn't really no plan for the whole summer, and that's fine. I mean, it's neither of those is like wrong in that sense. But in the same way, we autistics tend to be more logical in our decision making and our thinking. And so with that, you need more logic. And one way this is shown is, as we all know, kids and teens tend to ask why. And different people will stop at a different number of times they ask why. For example, you might say, a kid might ask, 12-year-old or something might ask, why do we have to go to mass on Sunday? And the parent says, well, that's what the church teaches. Well, why does the church teach that? Well, Jesus, the commandments say, keep holy the Sabbath, and Sunday's the Sabbath. But why does that matter? And you can keep going deeper and deeper and asking why more often. And autistic people will tend to keep asking why for a longer time. Not that other people might too, and it's one of those things where there's kind of an overlap, whereas certain people who are not autistic but like to ask why will go further than the autistic people who don't like to ask why as much. But I do think that we do need to be ready for autistic kids to give those logical, reasoned answers, and to give them very, very detailed and very in depth. So hopefully that's helpful.
Father, when When someone can approach you or approaches you and asks you how they can get further involved in their parish or in their diocese, what advice would you give them in getting started? Besides just talking to the parish priest, but maybe gathering people and creating a group.
Well, I think it really depends what you want to do and where you feel called in that sense, because there's all kinds of questions of how you talk to this priest or that priest, or how you talk to the diocese. I think sometimes you can. A first thing is to look on the diocesan website and see if they have anything for people with disabilities, or especially specifically for sensory issues or for autistics, because a lot of times parishes have programs already, and if possible, I think it's generally better to try and support and build existing programs than to create new programs that end up being parallel to existing programs. In the sense that, like, let's say the diocese already has like catechesis for autistic kids and it's going pretty well, and having an extra volunteer to teach it would make it even better. And that would be a better way to help out than trying to start like, oh, I'm going to start a whole new program that's kind of parallel to what the diocese already has. Uh, but beyond that, I think it really depends on where you feel called. Whether you feel called, oh, I feel called to really teach catechesis to these kids, or I feel called to help out in this way or that way, and see how that can work.
You've also talked, Father Matthew, about how those people struggling with some challenges also are called to minister. So there's sometimes a sense that, we create things for those who have particular needs or challenges, but actually those people also have so many gifts to share, and they're called to share those things. Can you comment a little bit more?
Well, yeah, I think that ultimately our ultimate good is serving others, not just like receiving as Christians. And I think that there are many ways autistic people can do that. I think, a simple way to think about this is to look at the parish social after Mass, which a lot of parishes have, coffee and donuts or whatever you have locally. And the thing is that for us, that's often going to be a huge struggle that we're, because it's kind of a free form social interaction. And that's a place where autistic people do not tend to succeed super well. But if, for example, you have somebody who's, a teenager or adult on the spectrum, it's like, okay, like, why don't you make sure that like the coffee's refilled and the donuts are refilled, or why don't you or why don't you, take the coffee carafe around and offer it to everybody, because then I have a role, and then I know what I have to do, and it's much easier to work through it. And at the same time, I'm serving, even if it's a minor thing like that, like obviously making sure the coffee and donuts are fresh and keep getting replenished from the back kitchen or wherever they're being held is not the most profound ministry, but it's ministry in that sense, in a weak sense. And at the same time, I think autistic people can often be better at explaining the faith to other autistic people, in the same way that even though I can speak Spanish, if I speak Spanish, I come across very much like what they call a gringo, which is like American or Canadian with a thick American or Canadian accent in Spanish. And I can say the Mass, I can hear confessions, but I can never really like be as much of that part of that culture as somebody who grew up in a Spanish speaking home. And I think in a similar way, autistic people, we're always going to be in a way foreigners, because like our brain structure, especially for nonverbal communication, is so much different that we're going to struggle with the ways it's explained to most people. But if a fellow autistic person explains it to us, oftentimes it can be more helpful, because they have oftentimes a similar brain structure, so that we can work through that and help with that. And I think that that's a huge way that I think we can have autistic people be ministers. Or if sorry, and we're just going to mention one other thing. A lot of autistic people are very good in one or two specific things. Like a number of like the top pianists in the world are autistic, but like they can play the piano backwards, forwards, upside down, blindfolded, but they can't manage their life that well. And so if you get somebody like that, okay, why don't you play the piano for them? Or you get somebody else who's really good with numbers. Like I know an autistic person who's basically like the accountant for several Catholic nonprofits, and they do a great job because they're very good with numbers and can do all that detail, whereas a lot of other people struggle with that more.
Sorry, Father, I didn't mean to interrupt you. In speaking to some of the families who come to you with some struggles and not and maybe just starting out in this journey, how would you encourage them to look at their children with like delight, and the uniqueness that they come
Well,
with?
I think a lot of times is to try and see that as that unique perspective, because it isn't just like, oh, he's autistic, he's different, but it's also there's a positive to that difference. It's not just a pure negative, and I think that's an important aspect to see and to try and see those positive things. For example, an autistic kid might be playing by like lining up his toys. That's a stereotypical autistic kid way to play, and it might seem like odd, but at the same time, it's a beautiful way to play that he's kind of ordering things. He's kind of ordering the world around him, that he's lining up all his toys in a perfect line. So, like it's lined up and it's lined up however he thinks it's best to organize it, whether it's like from the smallest dinosaur to the biggest dinosaur, or whether it's like, it's a rainbow of spectrum from, his red car, then his orange car, then his yellow car, then his green car, then his blue car, or whatever, like I'm thinking of boys things here, but those are classic things that kids will do. And to try and see, okay, this is actually a beautiful way to play because he's trying to think through and order the world in that way. And to try and see things from his perspective as much as possible, because a lot of times what people have issues with is not autism itself, but the consequences of that. Like I mentioned before, like there's a mother who came to me just recently and she's like, my son's just like running out of mass like all the time, my autistic son. And I said, well, like, can we try and think of like why that is? Because he's not just like randomly running. There's some reason in his mind that he thinks that that's the right thing to do. And you have to think, well, is he being overwhelmed? Is he being overwhelmed in his senses? Does he, if you bring in his weighted blanket from home and put that over him during mass, will he sit still a lot better and he'd be able to concentrate more in mass and things like that, because it's like his sensors are out of whack or not, are not in the way that it feels comfortable. Or is it something completely unrelated to senses? Is it something more of like, or those senses? Is it something more like where we sit in mass, that lady in the next pew has that horrendous perfume that just drives him absolutely crazy and he wants to get away from it.
Me too.
So
sorry.
I mean, I not to insult any ladies' perfumes here. It's just that I do know that a lot of autistic people have a sensory issue with a lot of perfumes where it's overwhelming.
You can subscribe to our newsletter at rosaryhourpodcast.substack.com. That's rosaryhourpodcast.substack.com.
I just wanted to just add on to that. When we talk about the brain being structured differently and some of the challenges that arise from that, I've heard you say before that it's sometimes not that alone. It's more the societal structures and norms that make it difficult for people to function. It's not so much that, there's something so wrong in the way that someone sees the world. Of course, it's just, or it functions in the world, but it's sometimes our expectations or our norms that create more of the problem.
Oh, definitely. I think we can all experience that in our own lives. Just imagine if you were dropped off in Mexico speaking no Spanish, and you weren't dropped off in a tourist area, you'd struggle a lot, right? Because everything would be in Spanish. You'd be like, I know how to speak, but like this isn't English, and I only know English, or things like that. And so I think in a way it's like that, and it's just like it's trying to figure out how we can accommodate those on the spectrum, and also not to say that like put huge without putting too much of a burden on other people, but I do think there is something of trying to see from the different perspectives. And I think that that is important. And I do think that a lot of times it is a society because, for example, uh, like there are some autistic people who have a huge problem with speaking on the phone. Yet there's certain things that you can't really do it unless you speak on the phone. When realistically, with our current technology, all that could be online, really. But how easy is it? Like, I don't know how easy is it? Like, let's say somebody has an auditory processing disorder, they can't really, like, sound just gets jumbled. And even something as simple as like calling up the pharmacy and entering your digits to renew your prescription can be a challenge for them. But like that could realistically be done online. There's no reason I have to call up the pharmacy. I don't know how to do it at my local pharmacy. I have to call them up, but like, type thing. So hopefully that's helpful.
So, Father, in working with some of the adults and young adults that I've worked with over the years, sometimes low self-esteem can be a big issue, and the struggles, that constant day in and day out of trying to not so much maybe even seek acceptance, but what would you say to a young adult or an adult who's struggling, who wants to attend the mass, and aside from looking for the sensory mass, but how would you encourage them to keep trying
Okay. Well,
and loving themselves?
yeah, I think as far as loving yourself, I could honestly recommend a different book, which like my book has some of that. My book has some things on that, but also for self-esteem and issues like that. There's a book called See Yourself Through God's Eyes by Sister Marie, like the French spelling of Mary, Paul Curley. And and it's really kind of that. It's seeing, in our failures that God doesn't abandon us and things like that. And I think that that can be a real help for prayer and for self-esteem. I've gone through the book multiple times. And so hopefully that's helpful. Beyond that, I think it's to not beat yourself up to say like the church teaches that you have to make a reasonable effort to get to mass on Sunday. If you're unable to get to mass, it's not, and you are totally unable, it's not a sin in that sense. Like, for example, if you're autistic and you have a total meltdown 5 minutes before you're planning to leave for mass and you're just like overwhelmed, there's no sin in not going to mass, and you're like, because you really couldn't at that moment. Now, if that is repetitively happening on Sunday morning, you might ask, well, why is that happening? And look at, to arrange our lives better, but not to beat ourselves up over things that are not really our fault, like that. Or, if we were unintentionally rude in a social situation, somebody said, oh, that's rude, but we didn't think through it. That's not our fault, so it's not a sin. And not to beat ourselves up over those things that aren't sins, because I think that that can definitely be a huge issue with the self-esteem and those of us on the spectrum.
Father Matthew, I know we have limited time left, so I just wanted to get to a few questions about the Rosary and about Mary. It's been a real focus for our team. You've been such an advocate for people with particular needs, and Mary is also our advocate in our necessities, a place to turn to for help and protection. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Mother of God?
Well, I always think of her as a mother. One of the things I often do in meditation is I have little images of the Sacred Heart and Immaculate Heart, and I'll often just like kind of look into their eyes in the images, and I really kind of feel a kind of love between us in that sense, in my meditation and things. And I think I've prayed the Rosary every day, at least since I've been a religious since 2001, so 20 plus years. And I think that you develop kind of relationship, kind of like that mother, that love, in that sense. Like and I have an excellent mother in a way that I can kind of get a reflection of what Mary's like in that, just like a lot of people who have a good father can often get a reflection of God the Father from their dad. And from my mother, I could get that reflection of Mary as my mother. And I think that it's kind of that familiar relationship. I often think of, the start of heaven as I'm coming out of this clearing in the woods, and I see Mary across the clearing, and I run towards her and embrace her. That's kind of my image of like the start of heaven, at least, that I use for meditation. So
that's beautiful. It's a beautiful image. The Rosary is such an interesting prayer. We've been talking about prayer in your book. It's both disciplined and repetitive, which may be helpful for some that, find comfort in that routine. But it's also very meditative and heart-centered when we think about focusing on the mysteries. Are there any particular ways that you approach the rosary, or that you might suggest that others approach?
Well, I think a lot of those things, like you're saying, the repetition is very good for autistic people, and the meditation can be helpful too. One thing I find, just as far as focus and sensory things, is I'm really somebody who like almost always walks while I pray my rosary. Like I almost like it's I've just gotten so much in that habit of walking while I do it. I can't really like sit down or kneel and pray it that well. And so uh, I think then in that sense, it's kind of each person has to find what works for them in that sense. Like this is definitely not a critique of anybody who does it a different way, and things. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, movement is helpful for many of us, and the tangible beads.
Oh yes, definitely. I was pulling them out of my pocket. I had actually left them on my desk as we were here, but I have, I found that I need these like rope ones with the kind of olive wood beads or something, because I had I've broken too many of the metal clasp ones because I just like stick it in my pocket and then it gets all looped up and breaks, and I've just decided I've given up on those metal clasp ones if I'm going to keep it in my pocket, and just have the kind of the ones with the little rope and olive wood beads. So
yeah, I think it's nice if kids can find something too, like their favorite rosary beads that they can touch and have that association with prayer.
Oh, definitely. And like I said, the olive wood one is more like it's in my pocket, because if you have a place in your home where they're hanging up, honestly, I kind of like the metal, the kind of the slightly fancier ones for that. But I'm like, I've broken too many of those in my pocket. I just have to use like the plastic or wood ones that are on a rope.
Is there a final message that guides your work and your ministry in this area that you'd like to sort of leave us with for our listeners?
Well, I think the basic thing is that to remember God is love himself, and he loves everyone, no matter where they're come from, whatever their neurology is or anything like that. And I think that we as a church need to reflect God's image in that regard and love all people, whether they're autistic or not autistic, whether they can speak or not, whether they have this trait or that trait. And I think that can really be a huge benefit for each of us, and a huge benefit for the church as a whole.
Thank you so much for taking time to visit us at our digital cafe. We'll be looking forward to hopefully visiting with you again at some point and having some further discussion. I know this is a busy time for you as you finish up your doctoral work.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to tell us just briefly, it seems as though, again, like we find the path that works with the strengths, the gifts that God has given us, and completing that work was certainly a big undertaking for you, but something you enjoyed?
I definitely enjoy it. Part of it was after I was diagnosed, I started talking to my superiors, and we were talking about it and say, like, where can I serve best as a priest, knowing I'm on the spectrum and everything. And I had the grades to continue in academic work to a higher level, like that. And I also in the times that I had done teaching, I'd done very well, and I can manage the social interactions there very well, whereas a lot of the other ministry the community would have, I'd often be struggling with social interactions, over and over again. And so it was decided to go through my doctorate and pursue like an academic route of theology, which is totally relatively normal for a priest. That like not every priest is in a parish, and some are theology professors or things like that. So that's the route that me and my superiors looked for. So,
well, we'll congratulate you now on the very near end of that work.
Yes,
and hope to have you back to have some discussions about that.
Yeah, if you want to know about, so the thesis is on a Catholic theological analysis of the right to informational privacy, things like genetic privacy or health information privacy, Facebook, Google, the NSA, looking at all your online activity and things like that. And so if you want to talk about that topic, I'm probably one of the experts at this point. Now that I'm, I'm defending a doctoral thesis after recording this, but it's likely the defense will already have happened by the time you put this on air. So.
Sounds fascinating. Thank you so much again for making time for this at this busy stage. And we'll hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Okay. God bless you.
God bless.